Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to our fifth episode of A Week Ahead, starring me, Liam, and my co-host, Tommy.
Hello, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. Sorry for the little bit of delay. We were both at a town hall that was being hosted by Governor Tim Walz, so that delayed things by a little bit. But we're both happy to be here to be talking about the news and discussing current events.
Today is Monday, April 7th. A lot of people should already know that from their workday. Um, for weather today's been crappy. Yesterday we started getting that chill and a lot of rain. Kind of had a lot of rain over the weekend. But today turned into snow, and especially leaving that town hall, it turned into snow. They're getting lake effect snow and heavier snow up in the northern part of Ohio, but where we're at. We're going to have like sleet and snow for the rest of tonight, snow tomorrow. Actually, I think tomorrow's going to be clear now, and it should say at the bottom. Yeah, a little bit of snow it says. And then Wednesday clear. Um, Thursday rain, Friday rain. That could also be a little sleety snow if it's chilly. But the highs on Thursdays and Fridays are 50 and 53, and the lows are 40 and 39. So, like me and Trevor talked about yesterday, really only today and tomorrow are the big like frost dates, and even Wednesday a little bit. It's 30 though, where today's like 23. Tomorrow's 23 low. Today's low is 25. So if you got plants outside, go take care of them. But besides that, and bundle up because it's a little chilly. Now stocks with Tommy, we changed it up a little bit on the overlay. We got stocks above us now. It should be a little bigger for everyone.
Very
I can make
cool.
it bigger too eventually. So
Before I go into the stocks, I want to comment a bit on the weather because I got beef with the weather today. Um, I'm coming in to, work this town hall event and help out. It was beautiful out. It's beautiful out. And I'm walking out of this event with a good friend of mine, and I'm like a kite. Like I swear it was windy. It was wind. The wind was so bad. Like I could have like just flown away, and you would never see me again. Like it was crazy. It was crazy. So I got beef with the Ohio weather today. But on a more serious note here, the stocks are doing great. No, I'm just kidding. Stocks are very bad. So the Dow from 1 week down 19 or 9.14%. Nasdaq's down 8.78%. S&P 500's down 9.03, and those were all last week. Last week to today, and Tesla stock again. This is your positive news for the day. They're down 5.85 points or 2.34. So if you're having a bad day today, just know that your pocketbook is not as hurt as hard as Elon Musk.
sure he's losing a lot of money right now when you think he was going to be making money. And even like after Trump got elected, his wealth went up because obviously like speculation of him being in the government and Trump giving him deals
Yeah,
with all the money he gave Trump for
I
Pennsylvania and other states.
for Elon, I'm gonna do this for him. I'm gonna play the sad horn.
Because Wisconsin as well, if I'm not mistaken, right? Secretary of State, not Secretary of State.
Are you talking about the Wisconsin Supreme Court race?
That's it. Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, Mr. Musk, in an attempt to, buy an election, poured millions and millions and millions of dollars into that Supreme Court race in Wisconsin and ultimately lost. So, that's good for us. And I hope that bothers him when he tries to go to sleep every night.
It will. Like I think I don't know if we said this before on this show. I feel like Musk is like Howard Hughes, so he's already going the Howard Hughes being government route now.
Yeah.
Zeppelins are the spacecraft differences there, so I think Musk will go crazy one day. He kind of already is. We don't talk about that. Um, but
It's
stocks
it's
are going down. I've seen people's 401ks down almost 50%. I think over 50%. People have had like
yeah.
120 in and have lost like 53 grand. So a little under 50%. But kind of like in '08 and anytime there's a recession, it does matter. It matters a lot for people trying to retire. It doesn't matter for people like me and Tommy who are young. They always say, "Oh, well, you could buy in." Well, that's also if we have a job with a 401k. That's not always guaranteed. But then also that if someone's trying to retire within the next 5 years, this is going to be tough. If your retirement, loses 50% of its value, and you thought you had $2 million to retire, and now you have 1 million, that's 15 years instead of 30 years you're trying to plan for, on average, let's say, or if you're lucky. um, so definitely a bad
My
time for the
my
stock market.
Yeah, my take on that is very simple. It's, I feel incredibly bad for, the people that did not vote for Donald Trump, and and their 401ks are hurting, and I feel awful, that people's retirements are affected, but if you voted for President Trump and, all of a sudden, your 401ks down, maybe you should take this time to reflect on your actions. Maybe you should be able to say to yourself, hey, maybe I made a mistake last November. But all in all, for the people that did not vote for President Trump, or did not vote for this mess, and how they're suffering the consequences of that, I feel very, very, very bad for those people.
And like we'll be talking about later on, it's definitely important too for like the investment into America. The reason why stocks are crashing right now because all these tariffs. They understand that these people in the stock market understand that like we don't have the workers for this demand, or for some of these jobs that would need. So they kind of like there's going to be a crashing in the market because of major investment that needs and hasn't been done. And something real quick I saw too, how today the only reason why the Nasdaq's in the green and the numbers aren't looking too bad is I guess there was a like fake tweet that got retweeted by like some news companies, 3 of them. Do you see about that? And it said like they were gonna do a 90-day hold on the tariffs, and like
I
right when they like the White House announced it was fake, stock market lost 5 trillion. So the stock market was crazy today, up and down.
I did see that. I just very, very briefly, I was walking around, I just glanced at the news for a couple minutes, and there was this debate of this 90-day hold, which proved not to be true. Uh, the, the Trump administration seems fully committed to destroying the U.S. economy right now, with a delusional dream of that tariffs are actually going to help us.
Yep, agreed. I think Brandy just got home from work. Her dad dropped her off. Um, Another quick updates where we are going to be talking about tariffs. I think he has a whole topic. But one of the stats we have, and since Trump got in, since he got in, and what is that? January 20th.
Yes, yes.
The stock market lost almost 10 trillion, 9.6 trillion to be exact, and we lost 6.6 trillion over the last 2 days of last week. So Thursday and Friday. Stock market's not on the weekends just yet. Get that 24-hour stock market going. We'll go a little bit
Yeah,
quicker because
things.
our first news topic is tariffs too. But we can, if you anything you want to say before we go on to that, Tommy.
No, I'm good. I'm good with moving on to the next news topic here.
All right, sounds good. I was going to move my mic real quick to be a little bit more comfortable. All right. So the first news topic is for new Trump tariffs, and this kind of like what they are as a whole. The last time we had massive tariffs like this was in 1930, and then I also knew we had, I think it was like 1840 or 1860, which was 1 year into the Great Depression. The Great Depression lasted until 1938-39, which the war ended up saving us from these tariffs and like from the Great Depression as a whole, because we had to manufacture more in America for this war, and we were kind of manufacturing since ever since Germany invaded Poland. Was that 1939 or 1938? I thought it was 38, but I might be wrong.
1939.
39, okay. So we were helping them until we got bombed at Pearl Harbor, as well as other countries in Europe. And so one thing I did put, and me and Tommy talked a lot about too. Like it seems like there was like a 10% minimum on most countries because like Antarctica got a 10% minimum tariff. And, like, I don't know what we trade for with penguins, but them penguins are about to be ticked off.
It's it's so crazy. Like, um, I saw online, they kind of discovered that they were using like a very rudimentary formula to decide what percentage the tariff was going to be for each country, and it was
Hmm.
so rudimentary. It was basically just insane. It had no basis in reality. And then this whole guise of reciprocal tariffs. But these tariffs are being put onto to small island nations, or not. I use the word nation very loosely, and in fact, I use it incorrectly because these islands, some of them, by Australia, by Antarctica, etc. They're totally uninhabited. There's some islands that have 1,500 people in them. That do no trade. They're subsistence farmers and fishermen. So it really just seems like it was carte blanche. Taking a jackhammer to a situation that if you were going to do anything, you would have to really think about it. You would really have to think about it deeply, and approach it with like a scalpel. But seeing that a 10% tariff is being placed on uninhabited islands, it really just shows the disconnect from reality of the Trump administration, as well as the fact that they really just don't know what they're doing. It's almost like they pulled up a Wikipedia article, Googled like you know all countries in the world, and then decided like, hey, we're gonna either do this rudimentary formula or we're just gonna do like a 10% tariff across the board, even though that these islands are not really nations in the respect of that they have no government and they have no people in them, but they're inhabited by penguins and other Arctic life, but they're still going to get a 10% tariff. So it really does make no sense and boggles the mind.
It is. We were talking about have a great penguin councils meeting already to talk about tariffs. They're gonna like child labor is gonna go up in Antarctica, guys. We should be worried about that. Them child penguins will have to work hard to pay for these
Yeah.
tariffs. I'm not really thinking about that.
I heard Tom Nook is the chair of that committee of the
He
Penguin
is.
Council. He's trying to get back all those bells. So he's not too happy about the tariffs as well. So I would also expect
House
if
prices
you
to
were
go up.
looking if you were looking to buy a house for your Animal Crossing island or purchase an upgrade, I definitely expect at least a 10%, if not a 40-some% increase. So
And that's something we could talk about too. We're already seeing in the market because last week Nintendo released or announced for Nintendo Switch 2. There was already supposed to be pre-order dates, but they delayed them because they're already talking about upping the price because of a market and the new tariffs. They are made in Japan. It's interesting to talking about. It's probably like its baseline model was 500 before tariffs. If you wanted it in Japan, the Japanese only model was $350. So that kind of shows that already out of state and out of country stuff was already kind of like a $150 tax. So now it's probably going to be a $250 tax or $200 tax depending on how to do it. One thing that's interesting on the document, and people on Twitter were calling this out, it like the text under a tariff document isn't consistent, and so it makes it seem like it was done very like sloppily by hand on a PDF editor, rather than actually like doing it on Excel and having like actual formulas going in and saying, okay, just round up to 10 if it's below. Like there's a lot of ways you could use Excel. But it's funny that the administration that talks about government waste and efficiency is very inefficient with how they do things. Because if you just give it internal numbers and say, Antarctica 10%, throw it up on a PDF, that's what you get. Because like the percents would be under numbers sometimes, that would be below it or just spot on. So you could tell it was done by hand on like very roughly on a PDF editor. They weren't even trying to align it. Because you could throw a line up there like people on Twitter were doing, and any perpendicular line off a number should be consistent, but they don't really care about that. And I get it, maybe just doing it quick, but it kind of shows the administration as a whole. Some rates are really high on places where you get many things from like tech to clothes. I saw Sri Lanka, I think it was 47%. A lot of my clothes I have come from there, even like Patagonia clothes that are more fair trade and more recycled and organic cotton. They still come from places like Sri Lanka. That's because we don't do stuff like that in our country. We do. I have Patagonia socks that were $20 for just a pair. Hemp American made socks, but not that many companies or even people kind of push that kind of stuff, so it's hard to get that as a company. And even then, I bet like American made hemp's like products, like it's not like the textiles are made in America. There's a reason. Some of it is like regulations too, and let's be fair about it. It'd be very expensive to have textiles, like do textiles on a massive scale in America because of our breathing regulations and aspirators you have to wear, and just how the factories would be. I'm fine with it. I would love American-made clothes. We kind of do need to go back onto the, buy like a shirt, and only have like 5 shirts you wear, and they're all American-made. The problem is like it's not like targeted tariffs. It's just like spread tariffs. Some are higher, and like I would consider that targeted. But since we don't have the workers for this, it's going to be a big issue. Um,
Yeah, can I comment on that for a little bit?
yeah.
So, I mean, I'm generally against tariffs in general because tariffs are a tax that are ultimately passed on to the consumer of goods. Ultimately, I would entertain the idea of a tariff that is meant to respond to things like some good is flooding the U.S. market, for instance, or in response to unfair trade practices, etc.
Hmm.
But really, 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 we need to be encouraging, you know, um, free and equitable trade throughout the world. We need to make sure that that if you're buying a good from a foreign country, that I would want that good to be manufactured safely, even though it's by people in a foreign country. But the world
Agreed.
is way too interconnected today to just simply be able to put a tariff, and think that's going to solve the economic issues of the United States. As you said previously, like when you're talking about, garment manufacturing, etc. That infrastructure in the United States just simply doesn't exist at the scale to support the U.S. economy. So that's why we rely on foreign trade for a lot of these things. Also, a lot of it is, of course, is corporate greed. They got rid of those. They got rid of that industrial capacity and moved it over to foreign countries where they don't have the same sort of worker protection laws that we have here in the United States. So you know, ultimately, I guess what people need to take out of this is that it's a pipe dream to believe that because of a tariff on a country that all of a sudden these goods are going to start being manufactured in the United States. The industrial capacity doesn't exist there, and also the education base is not there for a lot of these industries. Um,
Agreed. Yep.
we don't.
And like something I want to talk about real quick because like you like
Yeah,
the price of tariffs will always get pushed onto the consumer because of how big business are and how like free market capitalism works. If a government's not
yeah.
going to tell them, hey, you just I forget what they were like. They always said Kamala was doing, but like for controlled spending and all that stuff that they fearmonger. But like in some stuff, it does matter, and that's kind of why like we do it for utilities, is because it is a resource that we need, no matter what, and we should have. Like that life and liberty pursuit of happiness. But with tariffs, like we keep saying, like is this just gonna make things cost more? And like Tommy was saying, if the U.S. doesn't have educated base to work in these fields, tech fields, we don't have a working base to work in textiles. We don't push that as Americans, or really like have society or government authoritarianism like China or other countries to say like, hey, you're gonna work in this field. We just have to push them through incentives and stuff like that.
And to be clear, in the United States, we do have plenty of hardworking and highly educated people. It's just a matter of you know some people don't have the education to fit these specific types of jobs because these
Mm-hmm.
jobs haven't existed in the United States in a very long time. And this issue is only going to get worse as we see, programs like school vouchers being put in different states, where they're trying to defund public education, fund up
Yep.
private education, and create sort of a divide between, the people that can afford a good education, and the people that cannot afford a good education. So, ultimately, it's just crazy, and it really takes at least like 10 leaps of logic to believe that this is going to have any sort of benefit for the United States, even in the long term.
Agreed. That's another thing why we see with the stock market right now, why the stock market is crashing. Like we're saying, because they understand that. They know that it's a lot of money. And some of it too is that like these American companies, you guys have to understand, they pinch pennies so well, and they're so well with like the corporate structure and their fiduciary responsibility. That might be a wrong first word, but I'm not in business. Yuck yuck. That
Fiduciary duties.
yeah, duties, fiduciary duties to make a lot of money. That like they are gonna make less money because they could not now make 90% of Harley Davidson's parts out of country, but build them in America and say they're American made. We talked about this before. I like Fender products, but if you buy a made in America Fender bass, guitar, whatever you want, acoustics, um, it's gonna say on there, like it's not like since it's made in California, it cannot say made in America. So it says like assembled in California on the back, because California has a law. You need over 70% of the parts that you're building to actually be made in America. Um, and it's funny because like right, we were talking about Tesla. I saw a comedian um, defending Tesla, and he's like, "It's 100% made in America." And I'm like, a year ago, everyone on the right was posting the memes about the lithium and where they come from. So, like, how easy do you forget that? Like, nothing's 100% made in America anymore. Even my car, with its lithium-ion battery, um, is not made in America. And I don't have an electric car, but most modern cars, the newer batteries in cars are lithium-ion. If you live in a camper or have any type of solar system, that's lithium-ion. Like, same with anything. Like, it's very
You
hard to
know,
get that 100% made in America nowadays.
and in some instances, it's not just very hard; it's actually impossible
Yeah,
because we don't have certain rare earth minerals that are vital, that
good
are
point.
absolutely critical for the manufacturing of modern electronic goods, batteries,
Hmm.
semiconductors, things like that.
Like
They
silicon,
just
yeah, for
simply do
semis.
not. They literally just do not exist in the United States. And
Hmm.
that's probably part of the reason why Donald Trump was trying to extort the Ukrainian government for this rare earth mineral deal, where we were going to take all their minerals like some sort of colonial power, but also offer nothing in return, no guarantees of protection, etc. So,
Hmm.
you know, so I suspect that actually the Trump administration is aware that it's actually impossible to manufacture certain goods 100% in the United States, and he identified that as a problem, and his great solution to that was extort one of our allies that are fighting against Russian aggression in the war in Ukraine as well. So it's just um it's just crazy. And even let's say you look at something like a car. Let's take all the rare earth materials out of it, that are particularly important in electric vehicles. But if you're just buying a regular internal combustion engine powered car, many of these cars, they're manufactured here in the United States. That's true, but they're using parts from foreign countries.
Hmm.
Sometimes, like, I'll give you an example. This is let's say you buy let's say you manufacture car windows in the United States. Like
Hmm.
you import the materials needed to make that window. And then you assemble that in the United States, and then you send it back over the border to have its coating applied, let's say. And then they send it back across the border into the United States to be fitted to a car. And then the car goes back across the border, because certain parts need to be worked on. So even goods that are made in America, that have American manufacturing
Hmm.
capacity here in the United States, they're not actually, like, they're still affected by these tariffs because so many parts of a larger whole are going back and forth across the border, which really just speaks to how interconnected the world is,
Yeah.
and how just tariffs are not really applicable in the modern economy,
Hmm.
um, unless it's a very specific set of circumstances. And even under those set of circumstances, I'd be very hesitant to impose them.
Yep. And it's interesting too because um, my the company I work for, my engineering side, for my personal job, they're very old. So I get to talk to some engineers that even see very old engineering plans, and it's interesting seeing the difference in material that they'll use just to save money, like over time. But that's kind of like how the American markets work, and people have to get that. Like now, unless you're OPEC or federally funded from Biden's Build Back Better, those are the only two ways that you do need to use 100% American-made stuff. But there was times that we were using like stainless steel pipes from Japan just because they were cheaper than American. And we don't use stainless
Yeah.
steel water pipes right now. We use what's called dip or ductile iron pipe. So just iron pipe from a mill, or old reliable, because stuff is expensive from overseas now, and like tariffs would change that. But there was a time back in '08. Um, but what you were talking about too, I found interesting, and people from the Lordstown area or any area that had a lot of manufacturing would see this because I saw it with some of my friends' parents after '08 and the GM buyout. How many manufacturers shut down that just provided GM parts and supplies?
Yeah.
It could be seats, it could be seatbelt holders, it could be the airbags for the seatbelts, it could be the airbags for the actual car. There's so much different stuff that was made in America that after GM bought out of a government helped buy out GM from bankruptcy, they had to change that because they had to save money. And like, you know what I mean, like, and like every car company does that. Ford does. That's why I was talking about Harley Davidson earlier, because a lot of people like Harley Davidson's for the American American aspect of it. But other motorcycles like Indians are actually like have more American made parts. You could always look up like for certain cars or bikes how much of its part origins are from America. This is what me and Tommy were saying too. This is something that if you read like the Steve Jobs autobiography or know about Steve Jobs, this is something that Obama tried to do with Steve Jobs back in the day, and even Trump's trying to do now with push Apple to have more American factories. It's just always a tech issue that like we don't have the numbers to mass produce iPhones. So what you have to do, kind of like if you're making a Fender bass, because they're more expensive, you're producing less. It's more hands-on work, it's slower work. You have to produce your most expensive product. So Apple produces for Mac Pro in their Texas big factory back in which they started in 2013. Back in 2019, because I think Trump took this as a win, that Apple announced in 2025 this year that they were going to put $250 billion into American manufacturing over the next 4 years. Apple in 2019 did the same thing, but $350 billion, so extra $100 billion. So they've been doing this for the past 6 years now, and probably since they built the Texas plant in 2013. But they produce a Mac Pro that's like a $5,000 minimum product that only people that have for money and just want 8 screens to look at stocks all day or do video editing all day. That makes sense to me. But a lot of the times people don't really get to do that. Mac Pros are the ones back in the day that were like basically the square desktop Macs that people would use for video editing, like audio. People would love those bad boys. But now they're smaller, a little bit different. They just sell way less.
And if we, as a nation, I would support us, investing in education, so that we can, build up that sort of manufacturing base, in the United States again. I'm a very strong proponent of, industrialization, but it's got to be accompanied with, like unionization, et cetera, to make sure that, workers are treated fairly, et cetera. But the problem really, truly is the tariffs are just insane. It's not going to encourage that type of investment in the United States, I don't believe. We need to be doing that. We need to be investing in our workforce, for the 21st century. And and even if you do that, some trade is going to be required. You're going to have to be able to import, like I said, rare earth minerals, different materials, goods from other countries that, you may just like, you may just want to drive a Toyota. Like, you know what I mean? Or you may just want to drive a Honda.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. And so...
Because we have them freedoms in America.
What I think we need to do is... Tariffs are bad. Tariffs are a tax on goods to the consumer. But we also should be, looking into investing in our workforce and also strengthening the protection of workers to make sure they're paid a fair wage, not being exploited, etc.
I agree.
But the fact of the matter is the world is so interconnected. Like it's impossible nowadays to completely say, you know what, we're just going to manufacture everything here in the United States. That's not going to happen. Other countries rely on each other for their economies.
Yeah. And
that's just the way it is, and that's the way it's been. Since the Second World War, really, it's just truly mind-boggling, and
I agree.
I don't really know which more to say about it other than it's crazy and it's gonna hurt people. It's gonna hurt people's bank accounts, and it's just craziness.
And if you're liking what you're watching, make sure you drop a like, share us on socials, subscribe. I will say one thing, and it kind of makes sense to me. Like, free market capitalism got us to this point. Americans saying back in the 90s and 80s, all right, I want Chinese-made TVs, and even now, so the last 40 years, I want a Chinese-made TV rather than American. I'm good with that. You know what I mean? This is something my dad always told me, because for a while, Americans would have TVs in the bathroom, kitchen, bedroom, you know what I mean, living room. Like, they'd have 6 TVs. I'm old school now. Like I just have a TV in my living room. I don't have one in my bathroom. I don't have one in my bedroom. I do have an iPad that I could bring around, but like, free market capitalism, Americans going crazy with just like wanting the cheapest stuff and having more and more, has made us to this point. So we have to like realize it too, that like it's going to be hard to compete with some of these countries that already have the infrastructure, let alone millions more people than us in those fields. Free market capital, like for world market's going to do its thing. That's just going to be cheaper, and like unless we make tariffs 200%. Like an American TV, let's say it's made in China for $500. An American TV could be $4,000. People don't realize, and I was telling like Trevor this yesterday. There's a reason why, like that Johnny Cash song that I love, One Piece at a Time, was made in 1963. Talks about working at a Cadillac factory and building one. Um, he says he wanted a Cadillac worth 100 grand. So if back in the day the expectation to get a four-door convertible Cadillac was 100 grand, which is an Escalade nowadays. We have to realize that things were different back in the day. There's a reason why Americans were more at home and a little bit more simple with how they spend money, is because some stuff was more money. Buying a car was a lot of money. Household appliances were $2,000, $4,000 for a refrigerator. You know what I mean? You couldn't get a $200 refrigerator made in another country and shipped over here from a boat back in the day. And then we can go real quick. We kind of already went over our funny topic for the week, which is the Tesla sales plunges, and how they have the biggest decline in history of sales. The stocks aren't doing too good. First 3 months of the year down negative 13%. So that's also very fun. And I think a lot of this too is probably some of them recalls. Recalls aren't good for sales, and having a cheap car like the Cybertruck, and like we talked about time and time again. For the Tesla fanboys, yes, they are blind to it. For the people in the middle, that Cybertruck rollout was not good at all. People like Marcus Brownlee, who's a great tech YouTuber, is calling him out on the Roadster already because it's like 7 years later than he said it was. So like there are things that there's a reason why it's going down, and there's other companies like me and Tommy talk about it. If I had the money, I'd be buying a Lyric. I'm a Cadillac fan. I drive one. I love them. History and family to that. Everyone's different. That's one thing I do love about America too. Is like we have that free choice capitalism. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna give someone crap if they drive a Toyota or a Honda, just because that's what they want to do, and like that's the choice of America. You know what I mean? But we have to be realistic of that too when it comes to hurting our pocketbooks.
Certainly, and certain car brands I would give people crap on, but I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Um,
And we love the Nissans here.
we love the Nissans up here. Shout out to all the Nissan drivers out there that are watching. Um, but no, I think it's just when I'm thinking about these Tesla sales declines. Let's just take it all. Let's try to remove like what Elon has done to this nation, which of course is disastrous. But if you're a CEO of a crazy profitable company, you know, it's not smart to get into politics. Because people are going to despise you. The only reason why, I could think, it would be smart to get into politics. And this is probably the reason why Elon Musk, decided to, join the Trump administration was, is that he would have influence over, regulations and stuff like that.
Which he's doing right now for his rockets, his cars, everything.
Right. Like the U.S. government buys, it buys materials from like SpaceX, so they can provide, services to NASA and the U.S. government, uh, but that's like the reason why he's doing it. But like generally speaking, why would you want as a business person to be hated by half of the country? Like what do you think was going to happen? Especially when you're Elon Musk, and you're just generally not a likable person.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I don't think even a lot of people look at Elon and are like, wow, I would like to be friends with that guy. I certainly don't. I don't know very many people. I was like, wow, I bet Elon's really cool. really cool.
And
Um,
that's the only Joe Rogan episodes I watch now is the Elon ones, just to see how weird he is. Like actually seeing a
yeah,
man talk for 2 hours, you would see how weird he is, and it's great. But be aware of that, and you're 100% right. And it's kind of like what you said before. If the Democrats threw up if Biden had George Soros in the White House, if Obama had Steve Jobs in the White House doing this, and he was getting rid of American manufacturing regulation, so we could be like China and produce Apple products in America and have suicide nets. Like no, like that's just not what we're about though. So we do have to realize that one side's doing that and one side's not doing that.
right, exactly. It's just the conflict of interest is insane.
Mhm.
Hey, I'm gonna head the Department of Government Efficiency, and by the way, I'm gonna be reviewing the regulation that directly affects my car company and my space company.
Yep, it's
Cool,
crazy.
cool.
And let's try to be fair, guys. When the right was protesting Bud Light, we weren't like, "Oh my God, the right hates all beer. They must hate beer." So like just because like we are protesting and um, not wanting to buy what's that word? Starts with a B.
Boycotting.
Boycotting Teslas, just like if we're right with Bud Light, like that's what we feel like is right, and like that is okay. That is our right in America. America has a history of boycotts and boycotting actually changing things. If people like a lot of people need to learn history because I mean like the boycotts with the apartheids in South Africa helped out really well in getting Nelson Mandela out and everything situated there with the two groups and less fighting. But we kind of really need to realize that.
Or, the Montgomery bus boycott. One of the key moments in civil rights history here in the United States. That had a profound effect. But like personally, I love electric cars. I think electric cars are the future. Actually, my grandfather owns a very nice electric Chevy Blazer. So I think that they're fantastic vehicles. They definitely need more infrastructure. Put in,
Mm.
for fast charging and et cetera. So you can drive them longer distances and stuff. But for a lot of people, they make a whole lot of sense. It's just that with Tesla specifically, I just hate the man. Like
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
No,
That's
same.
how I kind of look at it.
And like to me, like we have that right, just like anyone has that right too. But we can go
Exactly.
on to our next topic real quick because we've been talking about this for a minute. But that's kind of like what we like to do, especially when we talk about Teslas and cars. Um, which would be the hands-off protests that happened. Was this only between Ohio and Pennsylvania?
No, it was nationwide. So, last on April 5th, there was nationwide protests about protesting the Trump administration. Here locally, there was one in Warren Courthouse Square. There was also one in front of the federal courthouse / federal building in Youngstown. But they were going on in Washington D.C. and pretty much every major city throughout the United States.
That's awesome. I was there in Youngstown. I know a lot of people in the Warren one as well. It was mostly seems like it was anti-Trump and Musk protests, but I also pulled up the article. Um,
Yeah, there was, obviously a lot of people angry about the Trump administration. Various, different reasons why they were mad, which was interesting to see. All of which are valid. Some people were mad about the VA. Some people were mad about the Department of Education. Some people were mad about the backsliding of women's rights. Now, me personally, I'm mad about all of it.
mhm.
And I think a lot of people are mad about all of it. It's, I'm gonna circle answer choice C, all of the above. I
Mhm.
think that's most people, but it was certainly interesting to see sort of the designs on the different protest signs. The sort of issues that you know, um, you know, people are passionate about it, and have strong disagreements with the fascist regime currently in charge here. So
Mhm.
I'm just incredibly proud of all the people that went out there and exercised their constitutional right to have their voices heard, and ultimately it just needs to keep happening, and it's something that needs to be capitalized upon. To continue this. Put pressure, speak truth to power, those sorts of things.
Yep. Agreed. Hands off our rights, democracy, and our future. Everything going on. It was demanding democracy, equity, and accountability from the powerful. And I agree. Like seeing everyone there was interesting, and um, kind of what like actually how people feel about it. Because like this is just my personal opinion. It's interesting after the right lost what they do versus what the left does. You know what I'm saying? As a
Yeah.
whole, I'm not talking about like January 6th as a whole, but the right doesn't really like protest either or get together um, to talk about their issues or what they want to feel like. So like that's the one thing I kind of feel like is interesting too is that um,
Yeah, if you look at, I'm really gonna pull out my my 4-ish semesters of political philosophy classes that I attend, but if you look at the word conservative, the root of that word is the root conserve. So that they want things to kind of stay static. They don't really like radical change. They don't like change at all.
mm-hmm.
So if with that sort of like mindset, you're going to be less likely to, protest because you like the status quo. So
Yep.
if you look at liberals or progressives, the root of the word progressive is progress. You want to fix issues, you want to make the lives better for not only yourself but your friends, your family, your fellow citizens. So that sort of mindset is more um conducive to you know exercising your constitutional rights through a peaceful protest.
Agreed, and that makes sense too. I kind of get what you're saying, but then it's also interesting this like how like maybe it is like our country is just more conservative as a whole because like after they lose they kind of like don't do anything to regroup besides like the marketing and the propaganda from whoever their campaign person is, and apparently that works as well. Um, you know what I mean? As getting together and protesting, and it's interesting too because even if it isn't, I don't know, like a lot of things like they feel for now aren't always like ultra conservative, or like they want to protect children and they also don't like the rich and want to do certain other things that aren't really just like conservative. So it's interesting how they still take a conservative approach on that, and they kind of still feel like they're doing something. Um, but
So
I get it
you
either way.
know you know I'm glad you mentioned this though, because you know the conservatives, conserving the status quo, that's true. But also when you think of a conservative, you think about small government.
Hmm.
Small government,
At
we don't
least
want the
old school
government, going.
conservatives, Reagan conservatives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where I'm getting, but today's conservatives, they're in favor of getting, into people's bedrooms, deciding, what they can and cannot do with their own bodies, denying people the right to use a restroom, it, it's absolutely insane. But these are the same people that will say, government's too big. Government's too big. I'm in favor of small government. Oh, but by the way, you know, I'm going to tell you how to, what you can do in your sex life.
Yeah.
Like it's just completely ridiculous.
And it's interesting too. Like I wonder, like what propaganda, maybe it's ignorance to make them feel like it's big government to protect yourself and people around you. Like in regulations, because they're so afraid of regulations. And I debate with old people on Facebook, Tommy, who don't know the difference between a regulation, a law, and a mandate. Now, if I'm not wrong, those are three different things that are put in place differently by different
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you guys have to understand, like regulations are here to protect us. It's not like a speeding ticket for the environment, even though it kind of is. But like, just like a speeding ticket, it's for safety. Like we want people to live longer, be able to breathe well. Um, so I kind of always thought that was interesting that like old like what made them back in the day believe that from like actually being small government, because like to me big government is allowing companies to pollute on my land. If this is
Yeah.
like true freedom, it shouldn't really be like that.
And a lot of them want big government, like I just talked about, women's issues, LGBTQ plus
Military
issues,
imperialism.
like they want big government. But like even like let's say local, you know, if they may be against, um taxes, but they still want that fire department to come and put out their house fire. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
Yeah.
I was I'm not normally a combative person online, actually, believe it or not. I just don't have the time for it or the mental energy. But I was reading some comments on Facebook the other day, and it was a guy that was attacking Governor Tim Walz, who we just saw speak today. And he was saying, he's like, if you don't know, Governor Walz, um, put menstrual products into schools in his state, which is something I strongly support. I think it's a human right, it's a human dignity issue, and it's absolutely something that the government should fund and taxpayers should support. Full
Agreed.
stop.
Yep.
But this one guy was saying, oh, that's just bad parenting. When I was a kid, or when I had kids, I made sure my daughters had those things every day. I don't want my tax money being used to fund bad parents. So I'm like, oh my God, and I'm like crashing out. I'm like, I can't believe I just read this.
Hmm.
So against my better judgment, I hopped in this Facebook thread. And my message is very simple to these people. If you're so against your tax money being used to help other people, you should reject civil society and go live in the woods. Don't, but don't
Hmm.
expect people to come help you. Full
Yeah.
stop. And that's what I told the guy. Yeah, I got
Yeah.
like a laughing emoji out of it, but just the hypocrisy. Oh, I want all the help I can get, but I don't want any sort of help, to other people.
Yep.
It's a poor people, minorities, etc. Just ridiculous, and I'm tired of hearing about it.
I agree, and like a lot of it too is like it's just ignorance or maybe just don't care. But like a lot of things get provided by the government. If like if anyone has ever taken a public health class or just any type of like environmental engineering class, environmental health, environmental science, you kind of learn that like the reason why we are here is because of sanitation and the medical field. Like why we have longer
Yeah.
lifespans, why we live longer. The sanitation aspect of that is that in America we do have the best water and sanitation systems. We just do. But that's provided by the government. If it was for Wild West and everyone had outhouses, you know what I mean, we still could be dying from plagues and certain deaths. But a lot of people like don't understand that, and they don't understand that that's a product. Even though they pay the bill, it's still by the government. And kind of like Tim was talking about today, which is extremely true, you see it in townships and in smaller areas like Salem, Champion. It's very hard to pay for large capital improvement projects, which is a wastewater treatment plant. It could be a water treatment plant. It could be a jail. It could be to have a police. It could be a whole bunch of other stuff. It could be for having a dump instead of having a private side. A lot of people, we have a lot of private solid waste management nowadays, and even private and like recycling facilities. So like even though we pay for this, like it doesn't pay for the capital improvements that need to be done. Sometimes for roadways, it just all depends. Schools, like he said, he was saying schools and water treatment plants because even for a small area, a township, a new water treatment plant could be $20 million. I've seen water towers be $20 million up in Ashtabula County because actually we get a lot of our water towers from Kentucky. At least I've talked to 10 water tower manufacturers. It's really interesting how much stuff's out of state, and like that is kind of like for global market, but in America, like each state has its own market. Like if you're up in Cleveland and you want to get CCTV done on sanitary sewers, the cheapest company is in Missouri. That's 2 states away, right? Like that makes no sense to me. Maybe it's three
Yeah.
states away. You have Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, but it's still cheaper to have sometimes those people come in. It's weird to me, but that's just kind of how the economies work. Um,
Yeah. It's crazy.
and then we can go to our next topic now, which is Ohio Senate Bill 156. Something about how do you say this guy's name? Al Catrona?
Alcatrota.
Al,
Alcatrota.
Al Catrona from
It,
Canfield,
it,
South
it's not
Range.
it's not worth pronouncing right though. So
All right.
I'll kind of go through this quickly. We're kind of running up on an hour here.
Yep, that
Um,
works.
but this is just an insane law. So those who don't know, Alcatrona is a state senator to the south of Trumbull County, and I feel very bad for the people that are unfortunately his constituents. But he has this great idea, this great fantastic idea. But of course, I'm being sarcastic, which is he wants to teach children about a success path, basically. Where the first thing you do is, you get a high school diploma, have a full-time job, and then you marry, and then you have kids. So like to him, like, oh, forget the lack of universal health care. Forget the inadequate minimum wage. Forget the inadequacies of women's health care in the United States. The inadequacies of education. All of these issues that affect, the youth, high student loans. All of these would go away if you just married before you had children. Like, that is just absolutely insane to me. And I understand this is like a conservative wet dream. Okay, like they love this idea. In their mind, they're looking back to the 1950s. There's a white picket fence. You're living in a 2-bedroom house, a perfectly mowed lawn. The man went off to work. The woman stayed home. Like that's what they think is the ideal America here in the United States. So that's why they're kind of pushing this agenda, and they're either being disingenuous or they're stupid.
Yeah.
I mean that, like, quote me. Okay. Like, if they think this is going to solve the problems in the United States.
And to me, it's ironic that they are this ignorant with it, because it's about education and getting out of poverty, but they're being ignorant about the topic as a whole. Like, what you're basically saying to me is, and like what kind of I feel like too, is that they are just attacking it at such a wrong way, because it's a parent's issue, it's a kid's issue. It's not just a kid coming out of high school issue. It's very hard to take a kid in poverty and just say, hey, if you get a full-time job with your college degree and marry before having kids, you're going to be out of poverty. It's just hard to say that. Sometimes it's a situation, it's where they live. One thing I did want to attack is like the statistics, because you see people, and I've seen this like just on like right-wing like Facebook reels of them talking about this 97% of people that will be out of poverty if they do these 3 things. And I thank God every day that I know math and statistics very well, or people's water would be killing them and bridges would be falling out. But you should always understand what statistics are, and that they could always be manipulated. I could say, hey, every Liam Matthews from Ohio is going to become a civil engineer if there's only one Liam Matthews in Ohio that became a civil engineer. So you need to look at the stats as a whole. One of the things that I think about, and I'm not even just attacking the high school degree, how hard it is to get a full-time job that could actually get you out of poverty, but for marrying before having kids. If you were Gen X, it used to be 55% of you guys used to do it. Our generation, Gen Z, it's 45. And it's probably actually like way less, because it's kind of hard to like just figure out if you get married. Like, the statistic as a whole, you have to get married. So if we were to look up like what percent of Gen Zers are getting married, if it's like 23%, well, now we know that 45% of Americans who get married before having kids get split up, because statistics could always be manipulated that way in the equation. So the real number is, anytime you have statistics like that, you take your 97% and you say, okay, I know that 45% of Americans who get married before having kids, 97% of them will get out of poverty if they do these 3 things. So you times those bad boys up, make it 0.97 times 45, just like if you were doing a simple tax calculation. So that actually gets you the real stat of 43.7. So 44, less than half of the 97% they give you. And that's just of people who get married. So we now know if you get married and you don't have kids, 44%. Me and Tommy are talking, and we want people to be out of poverty. It's just like, this is such a huge disconnect with some of these Republican leaders. And I don't know this guy very well, so I'm not going to be too rude, but being from a Canfield South Range area, I will say that is a little higher up area. I am weird. I personally believe in not living in a sundown town, even though it's not things anymore. I do think that history and those people could still be living there and still be having that feeling.
It is very paternalistic, you know what I mean, to be telling people, how to live their lives. And what really bothers me about this, obviously you should get a high school diploma, and then try to get a full-time job, but like some people, like, they're disabled, they can't get a full-time job, and society should be there to support
Mm-hmm.
them. But what really bothers me about this is marrying before kids. Again, these are the small government people. These are the small government people, but now they're telling you how to, what to do in your marriage. Like, like some people don't want to have kids. Some people don't want to get married. Some people in a family cannot have kids. They're in a same-sex relationship. Or they just don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so it's just totally ridiculous. And what bothers me about this story is really that, marrying before kids part, because there's like this subtle undertone of like, what is a real family? That's how I read that
And
sentence. You know what I
we've
mean?
seen it before with conservatives. Doesn't matter if they're judges and they're citing the actual fucking Bible. When I don't believe that's how a judge with a separation of church and state should be quoted. But like we see this a lot with them, in that you know they say it's not religion, but it is, and like a lot of this is religion based. Marriage is
Yeah.
religion based. Um, for the only reason why, personally, and I get it, I'm not trying to be rude. A lot of Americans do it for love, but like I kind of feel like it's a tax incentive for a lot of people, and like this makes is
Yeah.
pushing that. Like if you get married, if you're married like 3, 4, 5 years before you have kids, you're group taxed a little bit better. But once you start having kids, that's when you get the big tax write off. So you actually couldn't get out of poverty that way too easier. But the problem is like just poverty as a whole. If the U.S. has a poverty rate of 11, well, Ohio has like 13.4. If we're talking about child poverty in the U.S. 13.7. Well, Ohio is higher at 17.7. So we do need to attack these problems. It just has to be ways that actually have um, a proven track record of working in other states, other countries. Um, like we're basically saying it's not really, like, to me, a realistic solution um,
Yeah.
to the problem.
And religion is, or excuse me, and marriage is religion based, in the respect of, certain, evangelicals, believe it's between one man and one woman. I don't care about that. Okay. Like, I really don't. What matters with marriage is the legal protection that it provides people. And it is wrong to discriminate or look down upon on someone else's marriage based on your preconceived idea of what is a family or what is a proper marriage,
Agreed.
you know? So, but to go back to what you're saying, we need to lift people out of poverty. And how you do that, in my view, is you invest in education. You invest in childcare. You invest in healthcare. So people are happy and healthy and educated. So then they can go on and pursue a career of their dreams.
Because
They
just
can
being honest
contribute.
too, like it's interesting because like we see people, at least living in Youngstown, Ohio, that do these things. They actually have a high school degree, work a full time job. Some aren't married before having kids. Some might have no kids, but they're always going to be in poverty. It doesn't matter
Right.
like how, if they were married before having kids. Like I said, some were, and like that's an issue too. If you push marrying before having kids and everyone's 18 married, there's going to be higher divorce rates. Like we know that for a fact.
Yeah.
That's the one nice thing about
Yeah.
free choice, is that one, you have a free choice to leave, but then you also have a free choice not to get married till you want. And one thing I find interesting about a lot of those evangelicals that say it's not religion based or marriage isn't religion based. Well, then I'll ask you, did you get married in a church? And that's just all I want to know. And then we could stop that conversation right there, because it just makes me feel better if you're just being like a piece of crap and being like, oh well. And it's not really a piece of crap. Some people like religion's tight with them, and I understand that. But like you can't say it's not religion based if it has to happen in a church, in your religion at least. You know what I mean? Like if you're a Catholic, they're very upset if you wanted to go and have a wedding at a Protestant church, or a Methodist
Yeah.
church.
Or go in front of a judge, like, oh,
Yep.
but it's religion based though, not legal based though. Even though you do it in front of a judge.
Yeah, or like you could have your cousin learn how to be a, what's it called? Not a minister, but like a mandated person to say
What's
it
it called?
within like 2 hours online. Like
Yeah,
it's not
I know what you're
religion.
talking about. I don't know the term for it, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
For some reason, magistrate comes in my head, but that's just another like judge term, that lawyer term that's not
Yeah,
really
no,
tied to that.
yeah, it's not magistrate. I'm brain fart on this one, but I'll remember probably about 2 in the morning when it doesn't matter anymore.
Same right before bed. Our last topic is the immigrant that was sent to El Salvador. Who was sent to El Salvador. We were talking about this, I think, a little bit. We were talking about ICE as a whole last week. But this is a new news where a hairdresser was deported through ICE. His lawyer hasn't talked to him since March, I believe mid-March, which is very scary. And the U.S. government says they can't do anything to get him back. And that is a lie. They just don't want to spend the money to do it. And whenever the government announce fault, they have to spend a lot more money than if they just push it away. That's kind of how.
And you have to remember. Mm-hmm. You have to remember too that there are several different cases with this. Okay.
Yeah.
And if they concede that they can get this person back, they will have to concede they can get the other people back as well.
Oh, good. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So it's just absolutely insane. And this story, really just highlights, the need for due process. Sorry to cut you off there.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if this is because there was one that was they thought a homosexual hairdresser was a part of a gang. You can't be homosexual in that gang, so it's interesting that like ICE isn't really they don't actually know like these gangs like they think they do. I feel like that's pretty easy to know about a gang if they're homophobic and being like, oh well, this guy's clearly homosexual. There's no way he would be in a homophobic gang. But like we talked about before, like there's a couple cases now where people mistakenly deported. With a hairdresser, man, I know they have issues with his tattoos. Where he has like a mom and dad tattoo with a crown. They think that's gang related. That would be like telling an Irish person that a Celtic knot is gang related. Like there's a lot of things from certain cultures, certain people from other countries that they have tattoos that are alike. A lot of Americans get the mom tattoo or get a Celtic knot or a cross tattoo. If our country was extreme and we said, okay, we have a lot of these white nationalists shooting up schools, let's deport everyone or put everyone in camps with white nationalist tattoos or cross tattoos, like it would be going crazy. So we have to be fair about this. Like me and Tommy talked about last week, it matters a lot in terms of due process and what is fair if they are doing it to immigrants and just even sometimes these are American citizens. Even like I said last week, I looked it up. Immigrants do have First Amendment rights and certain rights protected by the Constitution and Bill of Rights. So it's a sad time we're living in, but kind of what we're seeing right now is there's a lot of mistakes being made. And I saw actually from the Young Turks that even Joe Rogan's talking about this. So that's kind of good because he pushed a lot of young men to vote for Trump. Hopefully they can listen to that and listen to a lot of the issues that are going on right now and actually remember that this has happened before with the first Trump presidency in 2016 when they were ripping parents from their kids and losing them and having to get them apart and bringing them back together. It's going to cost a lot more money than it is. It's always easier, and like even Joe said this, there's a reason why you cut longer than you cut short. If you cut shorter, then you can't make a piece of wood longer, but if you cut longer, you can make a piece of wood shorter. That's the tale of that story. Not at times measurements are always right, so you should always know what to do and be preemptive about it. Just like with the cuts to Doge, if you actually think and take your time for 3 months to say, hey, we're going to cut these programs instead of firing people and bringing them back, or cutting grants and bringing them back.
It's just the basic rights to procedural due process need to be respected. It's that if you're accused of being a gang member, you should be able to refute those allegations. That's a cornerstone of American law and American democracy. And just to see it disregarded, like here in this case, this man was an American citizen, but his wife was, and just absolutely insane to me that they're literally sweeping these people off the streets. This gentleman right here, he had a tattoo. They thought it was gang related. It wasn't gang related. It was just like a tattoo. Okay, so like
last week with Autism Speaks, they thought it was, yeah.
Yeah, like it's either incompetence or it's just blatant racism. It's probably both. You know what I mean? Like that's probably what it is.
And it's never fair to our true duties because they're getting deported before they're seeing their immigrant judges. Which, so let's say like our grandparents when they came on Ellis Island. Let's say they were said, okay, you could be an American, but you have to go back home and then come back. Some of these guys that are seeking refuge here do it for political reasons, do it for gang reasons, do it for um, other protections and other, like, even religious reasons. If we send them back home, there's a high rate that they can get hurt. So the whole point of them coming to America in the first place made no sense. So there's a reason why we do allow them to stay in America, or we used to, until they saw their immigrant judges. But now we're seeing them being deported, and then the immigrant cases could be just seen later on, which isn't fair. It's not really how due processes worked, and then it's also like it leaves a lot of space for the due process to get messed up in the investigations and trying to find out about these people.
Exactly. It's just a scary time to be a citizen of the United States, especially if you're black or brown, you speak Spanish, those types of things. It's the idea that, the government can just roll up, arrest you, put you in the back of the car, and then put you on a plane to El Salvador, and you don't get to see a judge.
Yep.
What?
It's crazy.
What? That's what's happening. That's what's happening, and
we call how is that more efficient than before? How is a court date 2 to 3 months later when before it was okay? We just let them stay in the country for a week, a month max. Because I always felt like immigrant judges' cases were like, oh, you're seeing this guy next week, and we're getting it figured out pretty soon. Like that's more efficient than me, at least.
No, so like the immigration, dockets are incredibly backed up. There's just simply not enough immigration judges. But with this case, this gentleman was here legally.
Yeah.
He had a valid green card, and they still just scooped him up and flew him away.
Yeah. And that's a problem. It could have something that could happen to anyone, and that's how you have to think about it and be fair about it. Like Jesus is a golden rule that, like, I don't want that to happen to me if I have a tattoo. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I guess just to close this topic up, if you're good with that, it's there was an order to return this man to the United States by midnight tonight, and the Supreme Court has vacated that. So for the foreseeable future, while this is litigated, the broader legal questions that I can't comment on, I can speak generally about court cases and law and stuff, but he's going to be in El Salvador until this plays out, which could take a long time. Which I think is just disgraceful.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I hope everyone had a good show. If you enjoyed it, please drop a like or a comment. If you have any questions or input with what we're talking about, or for topics this week, we'll be back Thursday for our Northeast Ohio Sports Show. Me and Hunter talk about some sports. Japanese Grand Prix this weekend. College basketball championships happening right now, and I was trying to watch that again. It's 42-30. Houston's up right now. Hopefully that's the live score. Hope everyone has a great night, great rest of your weeks. Anything on your end, Tommy?
No, I hope everyone has a great week. Make sure you tune into that sports show and that the music show, the wellness show. Things are going great here. I've been really enjoying doing this news show. So thank you everybody for listening, and I hope to see you next week. And I know Liam hopes to see you at the next couple shows.
Yep. Have a good night, everybody. I'll see you.
Like and subscribe.
Yep. Share.